A man-made phenomenon is threatening marine life in the Gulf of Mexico, the largest dead zone ever recorded in the U.S.
The Gulf of Mexico, a vast and vital artery for the United States economy and environment, was abruptly closed down after an unprecedented and terrifying event that sent shockwaves through the highest levels of government, military, and scientific communities. For decades, the Gulf has been a linchpin of America's offshore drilling operations, a fertile cradle of marine biodiversity, and a major corridor for shipping and maritime commerce. Its waters, shared by multiple states and bordered by major ports, but all of that activity came to a sudden halt when an incident occurred that defied logic, rattled every agency involved, and forced authorities to declare the area off-limits indefinitely. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The closure wasn't the result of a hurricane or a typical industrial disaster. It wasn't a pipeline rupture or a natural gas blowout. It wasn't even a massive oil spill, though traces of oil would later become part of the broader mystery. What unfolded deep below the surface was something so unexpected, so disturbing that even seasoned professionals who had weathered the worst of the Deepwater Horizon disaster were left without answers. It began with a series of unexplained seismic readings, sharp, sudden, and unusually concentrated tremors not consistent with known tectonic patterns in the region. The Gulf, while not seismically dead, has never been a hotspot for major earthquake activity. But these tremors weren't natural. They were rhythmic, patterned, and oddly symmetrical. What's more, they originated not from deep in the Earth's crust, but from somewhere in the mid-water column, something virtually unheard of. The first signs of trouble emerged from a deep-sea monitoring station located roughly 150 miles southeast of Louisiana. Operators there detected odd vibrations and sonar anomalies, sharp reverberations echoing across the seabed in repeating intervals like pulses. Initially believed to be equipment malfunctions or interference from nearby underwater construction, the patterns grew louder and more consistent over several days. Then, without warning, the station went offline completely. A team was dispatched to investigate, expecting to find damaged sensors or compromised cables. What they found, or rather didn't find, set off a cascade of red flags. The entire array had vanished, ripped from its moorings, as if pulled upward with tremendous force. There was no wreckage, no signal, nothing remained. Shortly after that disappearance, commercial vessels and research ships operating in adjacent waters began reporting strange phenomena. Sudden magnetic disturbances that knocked out navigational equipment, unpredictable underwater currents, and the appearance of strange bioluminescent blooms far beyond their typical depth zones. Some crew members described odd mechanical hums reverberating through their hulls, felt even above the sound of their engines. Submersibles sent to investigate returned with corrupted data logs and, in some cases, physical damage, dense in reinforced titanium exteriors with no clear explanation as to how they were inflicted. One unmanned drone simply disappeared, ceasing transmission after plunging beneath a certain depth. That was when the Navy got involved. A submarine, part of a surveillance patrol, was dispatched under high confidentiality. Its mission was to scan the Gulf's lower regions using advanced sonar and magnetic imaging, seeking whatever anomaly had been disrupting civilian and research operations. It descended on a calm morning, transmitting regular telemetry until 3 hours into the mission, it too went silent. Contact was lost in an area previously mapped and considered stable. No sudden currents, no geological disturbances, and no known underwater hazards were in that zone. But the submarine, equipped with emergency buoy systems and redundant communication arrays, vanished without triggering a single distress signal. The loss of a naval asset in peacetime conditions without explanation was the tipping point. Within 24 hours, the Federal Aviation Administration restricted all civilian air traffic over a wide swath of the Central Gulf. Maritime traffic was rerouted or halted entirely. Oil rigs were ordered to suspend operations and evacuate non-essential personnel. Coastal authorities from Texas to Florida were alerted but given minimal details, told only that the area was under federal emergency lockdown. Satellites were repositioned to provide continuous overhead monitoring, and Black Ops communication lines buzzed with traffic. Still, the general public was kept in the dark. News outlets picked up on the shipping delays and rig evacuations but were fed cover stories, ranging from routine maintenance operations to precautionary responses to a rare seismic event. But insiders knew differently. Something was happening under the water, something that didn't obey known physical laws or biological expectations. One internal document leaked weeks later would describe the situation as a localized dimensional disturbance. That term, vague as it was, only added to the dread that permeated every agency involved. Engineers, oceanographers, geologists, and even military cryptographers were brought into briefing rooms and asked to assess sonar readouts that resembled nothing they had ever seen. Whatever was in the Gulf wasn't just causing mechanical disruption, it was sending signals, measurable, deliberate, but unintelligible. A pattern of pulses, not unlike Morse code, began emanating from a single fixed point on the seafloor, a point that didn't exist on any chart before the incident. Deep-sea scans showed a perfectly circular depression forming at that location, expanding gradually over several days. Its perimeter was lined with symmetrical ridges, almost architectural in their geometry. From its center came those relentless pulses, deep, harmonic, and not wholly mechanical. Some scientists speculated biological origin, like the vocalizations of a massive deep-sea creature, but no known animal could emit signals that regular or sustained. Others argued that it wasn't a signal at all, but rather a form of high-frequency resonance tied to gravitational waves. Meanwhile, environmental sensors across the Gulf began to register subtle but disturbing changes in water composition. The salinity levels in the vicinity of the disturbance fluctuated wildly, suggesting a churning or venting from some unknown source. Temperatures in localized pockets dropped rapidly, forming cold plumes that sank to the seafloor and spread outward like ink in water. Marine life began fleeing the area en masse. Shoals of fish, pods of dolphins, and even migratory whales diverted their routes, avoiding the affected region as if responding to a primal threat. Then came the most disturbing incident of all. A deep-sea manned exploration unit, staffed with 3 highly trained operators, was granted special clearance to descend into the area with reinforced monitoring and continuous uplink. The vessel, built to withstand crushing pressures and designed with multiple redundancies, made it down to within 300 feet of the anomaly. It streamed live data and images until it encountered a distortion. Video feeds became erratic, sound dropped into guttural distortion, and the entire craft began to shake violently, though no external contact was detected. As engineers scrambled to initiate emergency retrieval, the feed cut out entirely. The crew was never recovered. A second vessel sent 48 hours later discovered only fragments, pieces of hull warped as if exposed to immense heat or gravitational shear. The internal components were fused into amorphous shapes, electronics melted without fire, wiring pulled into strange root-like spirals. Faced with this mounting evidence, the decision was made at the highest levels. The Gulf of Mexico had to be closed, permanently, if necessary. Not only was the area now considered lethally unstable, but it had become the epicenter of an unknown force that defied current models of oceanography, physics, and perhaps even reality itself. Whether natural or not, biological or artificial, the phenomenon unfolding in those depths posed a threat that could not be underestimated. Sealing off the Gulf was not a precaution, it was a necessity. Military vessels were repositioned to form a perimeter around the exclusion zone. Drones patrolled overhead in constant surveillance. Data collected from the region was now classified above top secret. Civilian inquiries were denied under national security protocols. Any remaining platforms, rigs, or private operations were given days to vacate, and a failure to comply would result in military enforcement. Even coastal fishing routes were adjusted, under the pretense of protecting endangered species. What had once been one of the busiest maritime sectors in the Western Hemisphere was now silent, brooding, and watched with the caution of a powder keg teetering on detonation. Scientists who had previously championed transparency and peer review were silenced or reassigned. Independent researchers who attempted to analyze public satellite data found their access revoked or restricted. Rumors began to swirl online, of course, as they always do. Talk of underwater civilizations, alien gateways, secret weapons tests gone wrong. But the reality, cloaked in silence and sealed files, was stranger still. It wasn't about what was known, it was about what wasn't. There was no model for this, no theory. just a growing certainty that something older, deeper, and beyond comprehension had been disturbed, and now it was active. Not all observers believed it to be malevolent. Some argued that the Gulf had always held secrets, that the incident wasn't the start of something, but rather the unsealing of something ancient. Stories of submerged megaliths, cryptic sonar contacts, and whispered legends among Gulf Coast sailors took on new weight. There had long been tales of black water zones, where compasses spun and silence pressed like a weight on the skull. Now those stories were seen in a new light, no longer mere folklore but possible fragments of an ancient truth hiding in plain sight. The decision to shut down the Gulf wasn't just about safety, it was about containment. Because if the force or entity that had emerged from those depths was allowed to spread, the consequences could spiral far beyond one sea. This wasn't a question of ecological disaster, it was a question of dimensional integrity, of existential stability. Whatever was rising in that water didn't belong there. Maybe it never did. But now, it was awake. And so, the Gulf sleeps in silence, its surface calm and deceptively ordinary, hiding a secret that grows darker by the day. The waves roll on, unaware or perhaps unwilling to reveal what stirs beneath. Ships steer clear, satellites watch from afar, and the United States, for all its power and knowledge, stands at the edge of a mystery it cannot solve, only quarantine. The Gulf of Mexico, once the beating industrial heart of the American South, now holds its breath. What waits in that darkness may never surface, or it may already be watching. Weeks passed after the sudden and indefinite closure of the Gulf of Mexico, yet the silence from officials only deepened. Behind closed doors, intelligence agencies, defense contractors, and scientific task forces scrambled to make sense of the data still pouring in. Despite the evacuation of most infrastructure, several unmanned surveillance devices and classified submersibles had remained in the zone, embedded in deep sea trenches, suspended just above the anomaly or drifting at the mid-level thermoclines. They were still transmitting intermittently, and what they captured only intensified the urgency of the situation. Beneath the placid surface, something was changing. A strange pressure differential began to form at the center of the exclusion zone. Though there was no eruption, no gaping fissure in the seabed, localized shifts in oceanic pressure hinted at a mass far larger than anything previously mapped, now slowly moving or pulsing just beneath the sediment. Its shape was indeterminate, as if shielded by layers of interference, electromagnetic or otherwise. Remote imaging devices attempting to render a clear model failed, often returning only grainy, streaked visuals or black voids interrupted by flickers of impossible geometry. The object, if it was an object at all, seemed resistant to observation, as if the very act of perceiving it altered its physical outline. There were even periods when equipment near the zone experienced complete data inversion, streams of telemetry appearing backward, or as sequences of symbols resembling unknown alphabets. Linguists and code breakers pored over the information, attempting to parse meaning from what looked like recursive mathematical structures, or repeating frequencies layered in such a way that they looped endlessly without resolution. Some believed it was an attempt at communication. Others warned that trying to interpret these outputs might have unintended effects on the human mind, subtle, cumulative, and irreversible. And as the phenomenon expanded in complexity, strange correlations emerged. A network of deepwater buoys as far off as the eastern seaboard and parts of the Caribbean began registering unusual acoustic echoes, as if the pulses from the Gulf had begun ricocheting through the ocean floor, forming a resonant web. The implication was chilling. Whatever was occurring might not be confined to one location. The Gulf could be merely the epicenter of something radiating outward, an awakening not just of a single anomaly but of a network of them. The ocean floor, once thought to be mostly uniform in its silence, was beginning to murmur. Among the most disturbing developments came from the atmospheric edge above the site. Satellite observation teams reported disruptions in ionospheric readings directly above the exclusion zone. There were temporary warps in electromagnetic fields, as if some unknown mechanism in the ocean was projecting interference vertically into the atmosphere. This anomaly led to temporary GPS failures and radio blackouts along the outer perimeter, where even weather patterns became subtly altered. Storms that should have dissipated gathered momentum instead, circling the closed area before dissolving in unnatural ways, evaporating without typical dissipation, or breaking into irregular geometric formations when viewed from orbit. It was during one of these atmospheric events that a reconnaissance plane equipped with high-resolution LiDAR was dispatched to pass along the edge of the exclusion zone. What it captured was stunning. A single, swirling column of water spiraling upward from beneath the sea, stretching for just seconds before collapsing into foam. No known natural or mechanical process could account for this. A vortex seemingly triggered by nothing, entirely vertical, and vanishing as quickly as it appeared. Data from the event showed a sudden drop in temperature by nearly 40 degrees Fahrenheit at the apex of the spiral, alongside a spike in low-frequency radiation. Whatever mechanism was active beneath the surface, it was not just affecting matter, but also disrupting energy fields. Further complicating matters was the unexpected behavior of marine fauna outside the Gulf. In distant regions of the Atlantic and even parts of the South Pacific, certain species began displaying behavior inconsistent with their migration or hunting patterns. Whales altered their routes. Giant squid, typically elusive and residing in crushing depths, were caught closer to the surface, distressed and disoriented. Tagging systems on apex predators like great white sharks indicated erratic swimming, tight circular patterns as if reacting to a directional signal. Though thousands of miles from the epicenter, the influence of the Gulf's mystery seemed to be radiating beyond geological or ecological boundaries. Behind the scenes, internal reports circulated among classified defense circles that began referring to the event not as an environmental phenomenon, but as a potential breach, a term used cautiously, almost metaphorically at first. But as layers of theoretical physicists joined the conversation, the word took on sharper definition. Some argued that the Gulf had become a weak point, a location where the fabric of space-time had been disturbed or pierced, not torn, but thinned like the fragile skin of a balloon beginning to stretch past tolerance. The incident may not have just awoken something, it may have allowed something in. The Department of Defense authorized the use of long-range quantum sensors developed under deep black budget projects to scan for non-local interactions. These devices, not typically used outside laboratory conditions, returned results that baffled even the teams who had built them. They showed evidence of particle entanglement originating from points within the exclusion zone and appearing simultaneously in disparate locations around the globe. The implication was staggering. Some force within the Gulf was influencing matter at a quantum level, potentially synchronizing behavior or properties across vast distances. At this point, theoretical constructs began circulating that had once been confined to speculative science. Concepts like temporal lensing, reverse entropy pockets, and multidimensional phase slip were no longer fringe. Now they were being urgently applied to try to explain the increasingly bizarre behavior of the region. One alarming hypothesis posited that the Gulf had become an anchor point for non-linear time flow. That might explain the strange data reversals, the distorted sensor readouts, and even the disorienting physical damage sustained by probes. Time in the immediate vicinity might not be functioning in a strictly forward trajectory. The psychological toll on those assigned to the investigation became a concern as well. Personnel who had been exposed, even remotely, to unfiltered data or close-range contact with affected equipment reported symptoms that were difficult to diagnose: dissociation, acute migraines, memory lapses, and even inexplicable déjà vu cycles. Some experienced vivid dreams involving submerged structures, spiraling corridors, or vast open chambers filled with flickering light. In most cases, these visions were eerily similar, even when the individuals had never met or shared mission details. Some researchers believe these cognitive effects were merely byproducts of stress and the uncanny nature of the work. Others suspected a deeper cause, perhaps a form of signal-induced subconscious influence, as if the anomaly was not just physical, but perceptual. To contain the risk, secure bunkers outfitted with Faraday shielding and layered cognitive firewalls were constructed for those working closely with the phenomenon. Specialized AI systems were employed to parse the raw data before it reached human eyes, acting as buffers or filters to prevent exposure to potentially disruptive patterns. These artificial gatekeepers weren't just compiling information. They were also screening it for symbols, shapes, or sequences flagged as potentially harmful, a precaution that may have saved lives, or sanity, or both. Notably, the shutdown of the Gulf led to global ripples. Nations with strategic interest in the region, China, Russia, and several European powers began demanding information under the guise of environmental concern. Their reconnaissance efforts, though thinly veiled, were obvious to U.S. military satellites. Several submarines, including one Russian nuclear-powered unit, attempted to breach the edge of the exclusion zone under stealth conditions. None returned. In all cases, communications ceased abruptly, followed by brief spikes in magnetic interference captured by U.S. radar. The message was clear. Whatever was in that water did not discriminate between friend or foe. At home, domestic energy markets reeled from the shutdown. The Gulf had been responsible for a substantial portion of U.S. offshore oil production. Refineries were forced to cut back. Import routes adjusted. The government issued emergency subsidies to offset economic tremors, but no one dared reopen the zone, not even under pressure from powerful corporate lobbies or strategic reserve coordinators. The risks were no longer logistical, they were existential. The entire region had become a modern forbidden zone, a 21st century Bermuda Triangle cloaked not in myth, but in raw, unexplainable data. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the Gulf closure? What do you think happened next? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.